In today's video, I have 10 quick tips to help you gain confidence in watercolor painting. Now, recently I was collating some reviews from my latest watercolor painting course, my online course, and I was looking at what people said about before they started the course, what they wanted to achieve, and what they thought they had achieved at the end. And one thing that struck me was this word confidence again and again. And this is what people want. They want confidence in their abilities. Isn't that what we all want? So today I'm going to give you 10 practical tips. Some of these are actual physical painting tips, which I will demonstrate, and some of them are mindset tips to help you gain confidence in watercolor painting. So let's get started. Tip number one is not a motivation tip. It's not even a painting tip. Tip number one is to learn to draw. Now, beginners tend to think of painting and drawing as separate things. Now, whilst you could trace something quite complicated to enable you to start painting straight away, and there's nothing wrong with doing that, drawing actually teaches you mark making and manual dexterity, teaches you how to place things in the right place and make them the shapes that you want them to be. And this is as important when you're wielding a brush as when you're wielding a pencil. Now, you don't have to spend 2 years learning to draw before you ever pick up a paintbrush. That would be incredibly boring. I just want to encourage you to always be working on your drawing and always trying to improve your freehand drawing. I have a full free playlist on this channel where you can access lots of drawing videos with little tips and hints that are going to get you up to speed with drawing straight away. And if you say to me, Michelle, I just can't draw, I'm here to tell you that's not true. I've been teaching painting and drawing for over 20 years. Everyone can learn to draw, and you can start today. Tip number two is no happy accidents. So this phrase has been coined to explain things that kind of happen on the paper because watercolor continues to move around after you place it on the paper. These things that continue to happen and then you get these pretty effects. Well, that's all very well and good, but for every happy accident, you're likely to have 90% unhappy accidents. Now, if you have a teacher that tells you that watercolor simply cannot be controlled, find a new teacher. Of course, nothing can be 100% controlled, but there is a logic, a very simple logic to how and why watercolor moves on the paper. Let me show you the one most basic thing that you need to know. There is one very simple scientific occurrence that explains absolutely everything that watercolor paint does when it's on the paper, and it's the need for the watercolor to seek a level. What this means is that when you place very wet paint next to paint that's damp, so it's not as wet but it's not fully dry, the wet paint will try to spread into the damp paint because it's seeking a level, it's trying to even out. This happens with paint, it also happens with water. Now look what happens when I add thicker paint, it won't go as far. So controlling the water levels of areas of paint, letting certain areas dry, manipulating your paints to be wetter or drier than other layers. Understanding this simple process will enable you to control the paint. Always remember, wet areas will spread into damp. Tip number three is don't compare yourself to other artists on social media. In fact, don't compare yourself to other people on social media at all. Not only have I seen some incredibly nefarious things going on, work produced by artificial intelligence, work stolen. I've seen this many times in Facebook groups where somebody comes in and says, oh, look at my painting. It's actually a famous painting. They've just stolen off someone. I don't know what people get out of this craziness, but people do it nevertheless. And even when these posts are genuine, you don't know anything about this person. You don't know what their resources are. You don't know who they've got to help them. You don't know how much money and how much time they've got or how long they've been painting for, which makes a real difference. Now, I'm not saying don't go on social media because social media can be an incredibly helpful place to get help with your artwork and to exchange ideas and to show the things that you've done with kind, helpful feedback. But it's important to go to the right places. Now, there's a couple of Facebook groups, if you do Facebook, that I do recommend. One is, of course, my own. Why would you not be in my Facebook group? It's the kindest group on the internet. And you know why that is? Because if anybody's unkind, I kick them out unceremoniously. The other group that I would recommend is a group called Watercolor Beginners and Beyond. It's a group that I go in all the time. It's helpful and you'll get a full range from absolute beginners to very experienced artists, everybody helping each other, and some fun challenges too. Tip number 4 is to use mixed media alongside your watercolor. Watercolors are absolutely made for mixed media. It's so helpful and can give such interesting and good results. And what is my number one mixed media item to use with your watercolors? It's watercolor pencils. They're fantastic for adding detail that would be so difficult, especially as a beginner with a tiny paintbrush. Let me show you how to do it. It's going to be an absolute game changer. There are all sorts of mediums you can use alongside watercolour. There are things that you can buy especially, like masking fluid. Then there are things that you can use like candle wax, oil pastel, even exciting things like inks and metallic paints. But the first one I would suggest that you try are watercolour pencils, and you don't need to buy a full set. You can just buy a couple of colours. Now, if I wanted to do this leaf just with paint, I'd have to paint the first colour on, allow it to dry, find a tiny paintbrush, and then really try to paint neatly and keep my hands steady, which is much harder with a brush than a pencil. But with this watercolour pencil, I can quickly and easily add details, taking advantage of the many mixed media opportunities that are available to you is going to transform your work, and this watercolour pencil is my favourite. Tip number 5 is to understand and accept that mistakes are a normal part of learning. You're not doing anything wrong because you can't produce a fantastic painting from day one or even after 2 years. This is perfectly normal. Now, in my Facebook group, we have sort of daily prompts that I put up, and on Mondays we have Monday motivations, and the little phrase that I put up there, I don't know who wrote it, but the one that I put up on Mondays is forget the mistake, remember the lesson. So every mistake is teaching you something. What you're going to find when you first start painting, especially with something like watercolour that's very technique led, what you're going to find at first is that you just don't do very good work at all, and that's absolutely fine. Now there comes another phase, maybe 1 or 2 years down the line, and something different starts happening then, and what happens then is you do a partially good painting. So for instance, you do a great sky and then you mess up the foreground. You do a nice portrait and then you mess up the background. This again is normal because this is the phase that you're going through until you get consistency, which comes with practice. I don't know any other skill or any other thing that you can learn where you expect to do, perfectly from day one. You wouldn't go to a driving lesson and expect to be able to drive a car very well at all on day one. And yet for some reason, people walk into an art class and get very upset when they can't paint a perfect picture on day one. Mistakes are what teaches us and what helps us to understand what works and what doesn't work. So what makes us feel confident about a certain situation or a certain skill? It's the understanding that we know what we're doing, that we know what the result is going to be. And yet, over 20 years of teaching real life classes, so often I would walk around and see somebody sort of say to me, well, I've got this blue, will this work in the sky? Let's give it a go. Let's see if this works out, or I'm going to try this technique. I don't really know what's going to happen, but let's give it a go. And it's often ended up in disappointment. So let's change that and let's try one simple technique that's going to make all the difference to you knowing whether or not something is going to work or something's going to be the right technique or the right colour before you place it on the paper. New students in my art classes were always surprised when I would walk around at the beginning of class and throw 2 or 3 scraps of paper like this down in front of them. They didn't quite know what they were for. These are for trying things out on before you commit to putting them on your painting. Why would you not do this? It's going to give you so much more confidence that what you do is going to work. For example, if I wanted to paint a blue sky, I could just decide which blue to use and then try to put it on my picture. Or I could swatch a few blues first. I could compare them to the painting I'm working on. I could look at them full strength. I could look at them lighter. I could consider mixing 2 of them together or introducing other colours. I can swatch them, I can allow them to dry. Watercolour dries about 50% lighter, so I can wait till these dry and then I can place them next to the photograph I'm working from. I can place them next to the painting itself, see how they work with the other colours that I've already laid down. Always try your techniques and colours before using them. Before we carry on with these tips for gaining confidence in watercolour painting, I would just like to thank those of you that have taken a channel membership. It's a very low price each month. It just helps to support the channel and enable me to keep putting out free tutorials such as this one. If that's not something that interests you, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. Those things are both completely free. And don't forget to keep watching until the end so you can see all of the tips that are going to help you gain in confidence. Tip number 7 is to embrace your own journey and understand that it will be different from other people's, not just in the speed at which you learn, which may be faster or slower than other people, but also not to be too influenced by other people's style. It's very, very common for new watercolorists to say, oh, I want to paint like this artist, so I'm going to be a loose painter. You can also sometimes go into things like other mediums. I've often told the story of when I bought a large set of 100 soft pastels because I was very inspired by soft pastel work and decided in the space of 3.5 seconds that I was going to be a soft pastel artist. And of course, when they arrived, I mean, they're okay. I can use them. I've even taught them, but not really my medium. It's not my favorite medium. Now, at least I had the benefit of being able to use those supplies to teach other people and to loan out to students. Whereas if you buy something just like that, you may find that you never use it again. So take things slowly and allow your own style to develop. I've said this before on my channel, but you don't get to choose whether you are a loose painter or a tight botanical painter. Your own personality and your own sort of quirks and physiology will decide what sort of painter you become. Concentrate on the process. The style will take care of itself. You don't need to look for a style. You don't need to emulate a style or find a style. Just keep practicing. A style will find you. Now, I've often seen beginners try to fix watercolor paintings that aren't working that well by putting pen on top, which is not something I really recommend. It's usually a sign that the tonal contrast needs adjusting. But there's another way of using pen, which is a more traditional way of using it, and that's to use the pen first and to put watercolor on top. So in other words, a permanent pen and then placing watercolor on top. And this is something that I really encourage you to do, whether or not you intend to work in pen long term or not, because what it allows you to do is to really play with the paint and to be much looser, regardless of whether your own style is loose or tight. You can be a lot looser when you're working on top of pen because the original image is going to stay there and it's going to give you that freedom to express yourself and to play with the paint, which will teach you so many things. Let me show you what sort of pen to use and how it's done. Let me show you the two most popular ways of putting permanent ink on your paper, and then I'm going to show you one that everybody already has in their house. So this is the most common type we have here, just a permanent fine liner pen. It gives a uniform line and it's permanent when dry. However, do check because they're not all permanent. One that I prefer is an old-fashioned dip pen like this and some ink. This is much more versatile because whilst it's wet, it can be spread, and when dry, it's permanent. I'll leave a link to a video tutorial, a full step-by-step that I did using this medium in the description of this video, so you can check that one out later if you'd like to. But let's look at something everybody has in their house, a ballpoint pen, or as we like to call them here in the UK, a biro. And it doesn't matter who the manufacturer is. Here in the UK, all ballpoint pens are biros and all vacuum cleaners are hoovers. Lately, I've been painting and drawing hollyhocks, so let's draw a hollyhock with this pen. Now I've got my flower drawn, and unless I go really thick and dark with the paint, this won't be covered up, so I can pretty much do what I want here. I think there's a little bit of green in my paintbrush, never mind. But I don't have to worry about staying in the lines. I can just play with the paint and see what happens. I don't have to worry about background staying outside. I can blot, I can lift, I can add extra colour, and I can really get a feel for how the paint moves and reacts. And it's still going to look like a flower no matter what I do. Just remember to keep your washes fairly light. This doesn't only work for flowers. You can absolutely do anything with this method, including landscapes, buildings, boats, people, anything you like. And it's going to give you the confidence that your picture will remain okay, no matter what happens with the paint. And if you're worried about going wrong with the ink, feel free to draw in pencil first, wait a few minutes to make sure the ink is dry, and then take an eraser across the top so that you're left only with the ink pen lines to work with. Tip number 9 is to focus on elements, not on subjects. So what do I mean by this? You may have started painting because you, for instance, love horses and you really want to paint horses. And so you concentrate on trying to paint horses, but you really need to break it down more than that. Once you get really good at painting, you can paint as many horses as you like. But when you're learning, I want you to think in more specific sort of basic terms. So what are the things that you really need to learn? What are your strengths and your weaknesses? Is it color mixing? Do you really struggle with color mixing? Or perhaps you're very good at drawing, but your composition is awful, and so things never end up looking like they're quite right, even though you draw them accurately. Or perhaps your drawing is your weak point. Maybe you can draw as long as there's not perspective involved, so perhaps perspective is your weak point. Or maybe it's actually techniques and understanding how the paint moves. You're the best person to judge this, and so I want you to concentrate on learning the things, because we all try and practice the things that we're really good at. I've been training in martial arts for years and I'm now a junior instructor, and I can tell you that people always practice the kick on their good leg because they do a better kick with their good leg, and so they'll practice that leg over and over again because it's pleasurable and it's enjoyable. But of course what they really need to do is practice kicking on the leg that's not so good, that's not their dominant leg, the one that gives disappointing kicks, because this will help their martial arts all around. And it's exactly the same with your painting. You need to face up to the things that you're not so good at and focus on those and practice those rather than obsessing about one particular subject or other. So tip number 10 is to be proactive about your painting and drawing journey. There is something called deliberate practice that I made a whole video about. I'll link that in the description of this video. And deliberate practice is all about not just practicing for the sake of practicing, and you can practice all day long, you may not improve at all, but actually learning to analyze your results. One of the things that I tell students to do is to look at a picture that they've completed, whether they like it or not, and ask themselves, what are the 3 things that I really like about this painting? What are 3 things that I did well? And what are 3 things that I didn't do so well? And that gives you a focus then of where to learn. The other way of being proactive is to find some tuition. Now, this can be free tuition online. It can be local tuition in a real life class. Perhaps it's just something informal like getting together with other friends that paint. And if that's not possible because of where you live, or if you can't find the tailored tutorials that you need, there is a whole wealth of them here on YouTube from tutors like me. Most of the tutors that you find offer both free and paid tutorials. I have over 300 free tutorials here on YouTube. I also have a couple of paid ones that I would recommend. If your drawing skills need leveling up, I have my complete beginner's drawing course. And if you're just starting out in watercolor and you want to learn the absolute basics, things like flat washes, graduated washes, without worrying about an actual subject, then I have a complete beginner's watercolor course that will cover that, as well as more extensive watercolor courses. But it's all about finding a tutor that resonates with you. All tutors have their strengths and their weaknesses, and it may just be, the personality. There are people I can't listen to on YouTube just because their voice is kind of great with me. It's not very fair, but this is the way it is. So it's important that you find 1 or 2 tutors that you resonate with and that you can then take either free or paid classes with. One last thing that I would recommend you be very careful with is these sites that you join, such as Skillshare, where you pay a very small yearly fee and then you get access to a whole load of stuff. Now, there's nothing wrong with those sites, and there are some good tutors on there, but I actually was impersonated on Skillshare a couple of years ago. Somebody put up a fake profile. They downloaded one of my YouTube videos, chopped the bits with me in it out, and marketed it as some kind of course, which of course was terrible because it was just a chopped up YouTube video. So that's why I'd recommend finding the artist first, finding someone that's got, a lot of stuff online, and then seeing what they have to offer you, rather than sort of just going out there and looking for a beginner's course, because you could find yourself in a situation where you're not getting very good content that way. So start by finding a tutor who resonates with you and be proactive about your journey and what you want to learn. Now, before you leave this video, don't forget to have a look in the video description. I've got some completely free downloadable PDFs for you there. And I'd love to know in the comments which one of these tips you found the most helpful. Having confidence in yourself is really so important. You don't need to be worrying about mistakes or judging other people's progress. Just concentrate on you. We talked a lot in this video about drawing. If that's something that you need help with, you're going to find this next video really helpful, and you can watch it right now.